I will make a very quick introduction. My name is Jenna. I'm the Development Partnership Executive for Sante Group, part of my Sante, and we have invited three fantastic specialists within the specialism for neurodiversity along to attend this webinar, which is through diagnosis and beyond supporting the neurodiverse in the workplace. So without further ado, I'd love to pass you over to Madeleine Cole, Director of Venture Business Limited and the Inclusive Workplace.
Thank you so much, Jenna, and thank you so much, Sante Group, for bringing us all together for what is such an important topic. So my name is Madeleine Cole. As Jenna said, I'm the founder of the Inclusive Workplace conference and consultancy business with my co-founder, Ursula Tapender. And we fundamentally exist to try and close gaps in the workplace. One of the gaps that is hugely talked about currently is neurodiversity. So I'm joined today by two fantastic speakers who I'll introduce now, who I have huge imposter syndrome about. I don't feel like I'm anything near as expert as they are. So if we start with Nicole Curtin, who is the Programme Manager at Ambitious About Autism. Nicole, could you tell us a bit about your role and your experience, please?
Yeah, thank you. So thanks very much for having me. So as the Programme Manager of the Employee Autism Programme at Ambitious About Autism, I manage a team of careers advice and guidance professionals who support autistic candidates to apply for and seek employment. I also work with employers in adapting their processes, changing their recruitment practices, and taking on autistic members of staff. I also, before that, I spent many years working with autistic and otherwise disabled children and young people, and led on strategic development at a small charity, providing short break services, and also provide a lot of facilitation and training around autism and other disabilities to large numbers of volunteers. I also have an ADHD diagnosis myself, and so have personal experience of going through the diagnostic process and accessing reasonable adjustments in the workplace.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I meant to add actually at the beginning of the webinar that the aim of the webinar is to share kind of knowledge and education, but also to hopefully let you guys leave with some kind of quick wins in the workplace to become more inclusive. So Nicole has a bag of tricks that she will be sharing with us also over the course of the session. So thank you very much. Can I also introduce Amy Meslowy, who I feel like I've always said your name right until somebody asked you earlier, and then I thought, oh, I don't know.
You have, you're right.
Thank you. So Amy is the Global Head of Brand at Talking Talent. Amy, over to you to talk about your role and your experience, please.
Thank you. So yeah, I am a working mummy of two wonderful yet extremely strong-willed children who keep me on my toes daily, one of which is neurodivergent and ASD and ADHD diagnosis. I've worked with Talking Talent for almost 6 years now, and I'm leading the brand side of the team within the marketing function. So for those that haven't come across us before, we're DE&I coaching specialists that help organisations drive success through building inclusive cultures where all of their employees feel a sense of belonging. So it's a pretty magical place to work and with a big purpose and lots of impact.
Thank you so much. I think also important to add that while we want to talk about neurodiverse colleagues, we also want to talk about supporting families with neurodiverse dependents, whether that's children, other family members. So Amy will bring that angle to the debate as well. Thank you so much. As we go through, please do feel free to ask questions. We will cover as many of them as we possibly can, but we'd like this to be really interactive. So if you've got comments on what we're saying, or you want us to share greater, confusing my words there, more in depth on a specific subject, then please do just pop a note in the Q&A. Please engage with the poll, and yeah, we'd like you to be part of this and to know who we're speaking to. So let's jump straight in. I think there's some common misconceptions about neurodiversity, about the language that's used. There's lots of stigmas and there's lots of reasons behind that. I think very important to kick off with, what do we mean by neurodiversity and why is it suddenly so prevalent in the world and in the workplace? Nicole, I think over to you to kick off with your marvellous TikTok quote and take us on from there, if that's okay.
Yeah, so I mean, if there's one thing that neurodivergent people like to argue about, it's language. It, you know, as we all know, language in general is a very evolving creation. And so the language around neurodiversity, neurodivergency, autism in and of itself has been constantly evolving. So something that I discussed when we spoke about preparing for this webinar was that autism, ADHD, it's not a trend. It's not something that was created by TikTok. It hasn't just come about in the last couple of years. However, it isn't really old either. That doesn't mean it never existed, but it does mean it wasn't being talked about and people weren't aware about it. So the quote that's showing on the screen at the moment is really in reference to something that is referred to as the double empathy problem, which I think is always a really good place to start when talking about understanding others that have differences. And simply put, the double empathy problem suggests that when people with different experiences of the world interact with one another, they will struggle to empathize with each other. And this is likely to be exacerbated through differences in language use and comprehension. So you will have heard the terms neurodiversity, neurodivergency, along with a plethora of other kind of diagnostic names and terms. So what is the actual meaning behind that? What is the difference? Basically, the definition of neurodiversity is the range of differences in an individual brain function and behavioral traits, which is regarded as part of normal variation of the human population. So although neurodiversity is usually used to describe a group of neurodivergent individuals, it also refers to all of humankind because everyone has a unique way of processing information. So we all think differently, but neurodivergent individuals may have particular set of support needs as well as skills and talents. And I think that we could spend a whole session just talking about language and arguing about what our preferences are. But I think what's important is to ask people what their language preferences are. How do they refer to themselves? At the moment, in the current landscape, neurodiversity and neurodivergent are used quite interchangeably. So I think that it's really about what is the intention behind that, and making sure that you're doing the right thing is far more important. So if we move on to the next slide, please.
Yeah, sorry, trying my clicker's letting me down.
Oh.
I think what you just said also about language and the kind of confusion around that is really key, because I think in a lot of cases when we talk about neurodiversity, when we talk about race, when we talk about gender, I think managers are nervous of using the wrong language. And I think your advice there about ask people how do they want to be referred to is really important, because even within, for example, autism, there's different ways that people like to refer to autism about themselves. And I think that's really key. It's kind of being brave enough to not worry about kind of getting it wrong and say, I don't want to get this wrong. Do you agree that's the best way to approach it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a really good place to start with your understanding, if you aren't working with someone directly, is to look at the experts. So who are the kind of leaders in the field? So it might be an organization like Ambitious About Autism or similar for alternative conditions, as your kind of foundation knowledge around what language is appropriate to use. And then when you meet people, it's taking that on a case basis and using their preferences. For example, Asperger's syndrome is something that is widely been removed from professional autism vernacular because of its history and connections. However, I know someone that's in their 70s now who is committed to Asperger's as their diagnosis, and that is not going to change now. So if that's what that person prefers, then fine, I'm not going to fight them on it. There's no real reason for that to be the case. It's just words, it's semantics at the end of the day. So it's finding a place to start, but then building out from that based on what suits individuals. So, I mean, even on this slide, for example, this says neurodiversity. So it's looking at a wide spectrum. So this is a very good example of that interchangeable use. So here you can see quite a broad example of different types of conditions or diagnoses that exist along the kind of neurodiversity or neurodivergent spectrum. So that includes some that you are more aware of, probably, like autism, like ADHD, like dyslexia, but as others, including dyscalculia, which is focused around maths, and also Tourette's, which is also considered a neurodivergent condition. But also on this diagram, there's a bit of crossover there where it notes where there are connections between different diagnoses and some of the skills that come with that. And it's important to understand that a lot of people will have co-occurring conditions. So a lot of neurodiverse conditions do not come by themselves. They'll often have a friend tagging along the ride. And so it's always worth bearing that in mind, whether someone's aware of it or not. There may be something else that's impacting them.
Nicole, would you share the example of ADHD and autism and the kind of juxtaposition that then throws up?
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at autism and ADHD, so previously they were not ever diagnosed together. So historically, you could not have an ADHD and a autism diagnosis. So often it meant someone would get diagnosed with one of them and then a plethora of probably other mental health diagnoses. But more recently, it's been recognized that they can coexist, but they are arguably quite contradicting diagnoses. So, for example, autism traditionally would be wanting to have quite a lot of order, a lot of rigidity around routines and behaviors, whereas ADHD sometimes feels like the opposite of that. So it's like existing in a brain where you desperately want things to be ordered and be the same, but there's a little devil on your shoulder that's saying, no, everything new and exciting is better. And constantly never being able to get the order that you so desire. So it can be quite a stressful experience, I think, if you're experiencing in both of those.
And I think interesting when we relay this back to the workplace that sometimes, I mean, from a personal perspective, it's been suggested to me twice now by two different medical professionals that I might be ADHD, and I think I am. Having had that, I can very clearly see that. And when I look back at my own experience in the workplace and things that I've thought I failed at, I couldn't do it. I don't have that skill set. And I think recognizing that in people and not kind of, it's horses for courses, isn't it? And I think the more understanding that we have of people, the more we can help people to succeed in the things that they're strong at and support them in the things that they're not. Nicole, can you also just talk to us about mental health and neurodiversity?
Yeah, so the addition of mental health to kind of the neurodiversity spectrum of conditions is considered controversial by some. That is, I don't have particularly kind of strong opinions about that, but arguably one of the reasons that some people consider it to be controversial is because it is considered by some/many professionals that mental health challenges is something that you can overcome. It's something that can be treated and you can experience, and it can go away. It can come back again, but that there's an argument that it can be treated. Whereas for any other neurodiverse condition, it's an inherent part of somebody. It makes up who they are as a person, and whilst it can be supported and it can be managed, it will not go away entirely.
That's interesting. Thank you. We have one more slide that we just wanted to discuss.
You might hang on a few times. The thing's going to pop up.
I don't know when to stop clicking now, Nicole.
Spicy when I was putting this slide together with my transitions. So just to talk you through some of the stats on this slide, because it might not make too much sense as a standalone. So what's important to understand is that the first sorry.
No, hang on. I've got click happy. Hang on a sec. You probably know these stats anyway. But...
Well, I can say what I was going to say anyway. So the first autism diagnosis was in 1933. Actually, the first person to be diagnosed with autism died last summer. So very recently. So this is, our knowledge, where our understanding comes from. It's still a relatively, compared to other things, a new diagnosis, and one that we are still doing a lot of research about, and that there isn't a lot of research out there at the moment. Just to do a little kind of publicity for what we're doing at the moment. Ambitious is part of one of the first and the biggest employment studies of autistic young people that's ever happened. And our study is going to be coming out later in the year, so look out for that. It'll be all over the internet. You won't be able to miss it.
That's one of the questions actually that's just come in. Do we have UK stats? So that's interesting to talk about.
So stats around diagnosis is hard work. So you know that, like, I think there's a census happening at the moment. They don't happen all that often. It is really, really difficult to get accurate, up-to-date statistics about diagnostics, which is why we end up with quite old numbers floating around. So that's why that 1% of 26 to 65-year-olds autistic, that's based on kind of when people last checked. And what you'll see as we go through the age groups is where you can see that awareness, that understanding, those people reaching out for diagnosis starts to change. So when you move into the 9 to 25-year-olds category, you're looking at 2% of diagnoses. And then the information, this is from America because America has the most recent data. And what they are saying is, and that's the Center for Disease and Infection Control is who does all the statistics around this. And they're saying that 3% of 8-year-olds are autistic. So what's also helpful to know is that currently there's approximately 140,000 people on the NHS waiting list for an autism diagnosis. I would hazard that is higher than that now. I think that was from last year or the year before. Referrals to some NHS regions have risen 80% in the last year alone. And these statistics are also not including many women and girls and people from other marginalized groups who are still being underdiagnosed and finding it difficult to access diagnosis. A lot of our understanding of autism and other neurodiverse conditions is based around learning about men and boys, because that is who was being looked at back in the day, and we are still kind of catching up now. And what we have learned over the years is that these conditions present quite differently in women and girls.
Yeah.
So sorry, Nicole, you go.
Oh, I was just going to go through the other stats. So ADHD, for example, became an official diagnosis in the DSM in 1987. So again, relatively recent, if I consider myself quite a young person. And approximately 13% of 12 to 17-year-olds have ADHD, and there's been a 123% increase in ADHD diagnostic prevalence in adults. So currently around 4% of the total UK population have ADHD. So dyslexia affects approximately 10% of the UK population. Dyspraxia affects approximately 6%. Tourette's 1%. It has been estimated that approximately 15% of the population are neurodivergent. But since that isn't taken into account, anyone who is undiagnosed, it could be significantly higher than that. Some places, some corners of the internet touting around a 25% prevalence of that whole spectrum of neurodiverse conditions.
Thank you so much. And I think I think we've kind of led ourselves quite nicely. I'm going to jump ahead a question just so my lovely panelists know what I'm doing. I think we should talk about, you won't be surprised that I'm jumping around, the process of diagnosis. And Amy, I'd like to bring you in here, and then I'd also like to talk about women and why women and girls are so undiagnosed. So Amy, you have very kindly agreed to share your personal experience of this that you've just gone through with your daughter. So thank you very much, because that's a brave thing to do. It would be really nice, I think, to understand the experience that you had, because there is a huge challenge around being able to even get a diagnosis to then get the help that you need.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and I think just to touch on the first question as well around why it's so prevalent, because it's kind of where our journey began. And I think a big part of that was COVID. And actually that created this perfect storm for neurodivergent symptoms to bubble to the surface, which was where it started for us. That was the very beginning of our journey. So the schools shut. 2 weeks later, my son was born. And so Amber's world was just turned upside down. And all of a sudden, we didn't recognize our child. And there was the most incredibly challenging behaviours that I won't go into, but stuff that it was just a very incredibly dark time. And, you know, that takes its toll on a parent and a carer in physical ways, in their well-being and mental well-being. And I just think, you know, if I had been working at that time, it would have been unbearable. I was fortunate enough to be on maternity leave, so I could dedicate my time and energy to supporting her through that. And if you think that was 2020 and we actually only got her diagnosis literally a year ago, so January 2023, we had her diagnosis, and that was only because we went private for it, because it was an 18-month waiting list on CAMS, actually even longer than that, I think it was, and I think it's even longer now. And we were fortunate enough to be able to go private, which we did, and then it all happened quite quickly. But that, if you think about that in itself, and if I had been working at that time, I don't know how I would have coped with that. And I just think it's really important for organisations to be aware of that, of the impact that it's having on the working parents and carers of the neurodivergent children. So not just right at the beginning of the journey when the whole world's been thrown upside down and they have absolutely no idea what they're dealing with. But as that continues, you know, you just come up against different challenges and different obstacles.
Yeah, thank you. Can you talk to us a bit more about the physical process? So in terms of kind of, you know, the time that it takes. Also, I vaguely remember you having a challenge around them then not accepting a private diagnosis under the school system, and that the work that they entailed then for you to kind of fight for the support that you needed.
Yeah, so the diagnosis itself happened fairly quickly once we were able to go private. That was then sent to the school. However, despite Amber being on the SEN register, it was suggested that we wouldn't be able to get any HCP, which is an educational healthcare plan, which would entitle Amber to one-to-one support within the school environment. And the reason for that being brings us back actually to what Nicole was talking about as to why so many women and girls are going undiagnosed, is because she masks. So she masks in the school environment, which means that she pushes down every natural instinct that her brain is telling her to do to please and to comply with the environment. So because she's not clearing classrooms or throwing chairs or refusing to take part in the work, she's not entitled to that educational healthcare plan. So despite the fact that we then see all of the aggression and the outburst of that at home, it's not taken into consideration. So there's a constant fight to make her SEN plan very unique and bespoke to her needs, because that's the only way that I'll get her support within the school. And I have to say, we've been really lucky with the authority that we're in, and the school have been super supportive with what they can do. But they don't have the funding to give her completely what she needs, which is really, really sad and quite heartbreaking, really.
Yeah, it really is. And also the pressure that then puts on you, because all children that mask at school, then it's a bubble and it bursts when they get home, and the kind of fallout of that is challenging, especially when the working day with a lot of us that work from home doesn't end until way after the school day. So that in itself is a challenge, but to then kind of have to manage that because she's not being managed with the support that she needs at school, the kind of knock-on effect for that, and the time off work needed to kind of help her balance, and it's colossal.
It is, and it takes its toll. And I think, you know, in a way we're fortunate. I call ourselves fortunate that she masks. It takes its toll on her well-being, absolutely, but it does enable her to function at school. So I'm not being called daily to come and collect her. She's not been excluded from education because she's not in a special education school. She's in a mainstream school, and there are a lot of children in this local authority, particularly, that are out of education, and that parents are having to juggle work whilst homeschooling because the school environments just won't support them, which is just horrific.
Yeah, I know, well, this is my ADHD. This is a whole other topic, but actually the lack of support that schools have to be able to support a child like Amber.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. I'd like to talk about the support, how you're organised. I mean, amazing that you work for Talking Talent, but how your organisation supported you through that. But before we jump into that, Nicole, is there anything you could add from we talked earlier about the stats really being representative of men and boys, of why that is? I mean, Amy's touched on the fact that girls mask, but I think there's a lot more to unpick there around kind of social expectations.
I think that certainly there's a real historical element. I think that you can see it across healthcare in general. Which is it's not, I'm not picking on men and boys today. It's just another example of where we've come from. And so back in when autism was originally being kind of looked at as a diagnostic category, only boys were ever looked at. It was thought that only boys could be autistic. And so it became very much something that was seen as something that only impacted not only boys, but white boys. So there's a lot of cultural like elements that are lost also throughout the years. But certainly it's seen that the ability of women and girls, because they are socially conditioned from a very young age to fit in, to go along with the group, to generally be social, and bearing in mind that social skills is a significant part of autism, because they're able to kind of pretend and get along, that means they are less likely to be noticed. And exactly as Amy and you have suggested, that means that they are kind of getting by during the day, and it's when they go home and when they're in their safe space, which is often when they would be around their parents, that's when, you know, it becomes very, very difficult, and they're more likely to have a meltdown. And we see that represented for people in the workplace as well. So for adults who are autistic or potentially have other neurodiverse conditions as well, they might be able to get along at work during the day, but they can do nothing the rest of the time. They're exhausted. I've experienced that myself. It's this exhaustion that comes from pretending to be normal, holding it together so that you can kind of do what is expected of you, and then going home and having no energy to do anything else at all, because of what you have to expend just to exist in the society that's around us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is my favourite topic, and I'm not a man basher. I have a son, but I also have 2 daughters, and this stems right back to me for the whole girls get told to smile, boys don't get told to smile. Like, it's an expectation of women to be people pleasers, and I think this goes right back to how we raise our children. I think we're making progress, but we're a long way off. We've had a question about, you know, how workplaces can support this. We'd like to talk about that, but before we get onto that, just giving you all teasers, we'd also like to talk about the impacts that everything that is happening and all of these, you know, people seeking a diagnosis, people obtaining a diagnosis, the impact that's having on the workplace. So I'm just going to share some more slides. I'm going to not be too click happy this time. I mean, look, I don't want to make you all false promises. But yeah, so another lovely quote from Ambitious About Autism. So credit to Nicole for these slides. So neurodivergent children will become neurodivergent adults, and they are your future workforce. So Nicole, can you talk to us about The Future is Neurodivergent, which is a campaign I know that Ambitious About Autism are pushing?
So yeah, I mean, well, it's my campaign, to be honest.
It's our campaign now. We're with you.
It's basically when I started to look into the statistics, because this is an area that I'm very passionate about, because I'm working particularly with younger people and trying to get them into work. When I started drilling down into the numbers, what I found was that, you know, there was a kind of a real disparity at different ends of kind of age ranges, as was shown in the statistics and understanding, and around what the future looks like. A lot of people are saying, what do you think the future is going to look like of the workplace? And so what I always say in every work that I've done is that what no one should be surprised about is that children become adults. Adults are just grown-up children. And so if what we're seeing is a higher diagnostic prevalence in children, then that is going to be your adults of the future. So if there are 3% of 8-year-olds currently being diagnosed as autistic, then in 10 to 15 years' time, that is going to be a significant proportion of your early careers workforce. And if you assume that you know, autism hasn't just been created. A lot of those people are already existing in your companies, whether you know it or not, whether they know it or not. And so it's really important to start adapting your systems and processes, because otherwise you're not going to be future-proofing your business for your future employees. We're seeing all sorts of changes in the diversity and inclusion fields, and this is just one of them. So what it's also important to know is that currently only 29% of autistic people are in any kind of paid employment, which is significantly lower than the national average, and it's also often lower than other disability groups. For example, autistic university graduates have the poorest employment outcomes of all disabled groups ever since they've been seen as a separate disability group. So what we need to ask ourselves is why there's still a significant amount of underemployment happening for autistic people who are often working in roles that are lower than their abilities or qualifications. They are on average paid a third less than their neurotypical counterparts. And so this is something that we really need to change. And a lot of it can be changed by the environment that these people are working in, and the systems that they exist in. It's not because they don't want to work. In our surveys done by Ambitious, we found that there is a very high percentage of autistic people want to be working, and there are many skills and talents that autistic people specifically can bring to the workplace that are being overlooked because people don't want to change their system that was created 50 years ago that they think works just fine for them. Well, I'm here to tell you it doesn't work. If it's not working for everyone, then it doesn't work.
Thank you. And I think that brings us really nicely onto, we're not doing people that are neurodiverse, I don't want to get this wrong, Nicole. We're not doing them a favour by them, I'm one of them, by employing them. I mean, Nicole, you and I have talked about this. The reason I don't want a diagnosis is because I think some of my biggest skills are because I probably have ADHD. Now, Nicole feels slightly differently about it, that you said to me, I hope you, okay, I did check with you that I could talk about this, that you've done some of your best work as a result of being ADHD, and some of your biggest failures are as a result. I mean, maybe I'm just being too arrogant that I'm not considering my failures. The great work that I do when I'm like hyper-focused. But there are real benefits. I mean, there's benefit, we know there's benefit to having a diverse workforce anyway, but there are huge benefits. Nicole, can you talk us through some of the kind of strengths of, for example, autism, for example, ADHD, and why we should be seeking those strengths at work?
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of before going into that, to touch on kind of what you're saying about, you know, the kind of strengths in the workplace and kind of how I feel about my ADHD, is that what employers need to remember is that people are whole people. We exist when we're in work, when we exist when we're outside of work as well. And I'm actually one of the rare number of people with a neurodiverse condition that probably does better at work. The structure of work helps me. It means that I can kind of supercharge the ADHD and the skills that it offers, and kind of point them in a particular direction. But when I'm in other environments, which for me is more of a personal situations, that's where I struggle a lot more. And then, of course, as we all know, that starts to stray into your work life if you're having difficulties outside of work. So, you know, it can be a really different experience for different people. And so far, I've managed to kind of fly by the seat of my pants through work just by being strong-willed, I think, and pushing my agenda a lot of the time. So if we look at autism specifically, around some of the different skills and talents that specifically autistic people can bring to the workplace. So there is, I think there might be an infographic in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think that I accidentally took that one out.
That's okay. So what we can look at, so if we look at, say, mental abilities, we can look at attention to detail, concentration, memory and recall, pattern recognition, being methodical, creative, innovative, that real kind of offering an alternative perspective. So often autistic candidates could have an intense interest and expertise related to an area of work. They have enjoyment of activities that others may find more difficult. And they can really utilize the unique autistic experience and apply that to the work that they're doing. And also have to be really resilient. I think that often people look at those who, so to use again myself as an example, so I also have a chronic illness, and what people think, you think, oh, that means that you're sick a lot of the time, you have to take more time off. It's like, it's actually me pretending to be well is what I'm doing when I come to work on a daily basis. And people that are not experienced with that have no idea how hard that is and how resilient you have to be just to show up in the morning sometimes. And so I think the same can go for autistic people, otherwise neurodivergent people, that you think, oh gosh, that person's struggling, that must mean that they have no resilience, when actually it's completely the opposite. This is a world that was not designed for you, and that you're having to show up in it anyway and put your best foot forward. And if that doesn't make you a more resilient person, then I don't know what does, because we're quite a long way off that not being the situation for people. But certainly also around productivity, there's much more efficient problem solving, increased productivity, being highly organized. And if you look at kind of more around personal ethics, there's a drive for honesty and integrity and fairness, being committed and loyal. You know, if you treat someone really, really well, they are more likely to be loyal to your business, particularly if they are an autistic person and you have created an environment that is going to work for them.
But it's just to interject very briefly, Nicole, the work that Amy does through Talking Talent, a lot of their work is talking about how do we empower people to be trustworthy, to be reliable, to be accountable, because those are the skills that we need. Sorry, Amy, I'm speaking for you.
Right.
But I'm right, aren't I? That's that you know, you go in and you teach employers how to teach people those traits, and we're talking about a workforce that've got those traits.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, we're talking about impact and what does the impact that have on organizations as well. And actually it's huge. If you think about all those wonderful things that Nicole just described, can you imagine having a workforce full of those skill sets? But the people that have those skill sets feel like they belong, feel like they can turn up to work and be their authentic selves. And that only comes from building an inclusive culture where they feel they can do that. And the impact for the organizations that are doing that or are on a journey to trying to achieve that is actually huge. You know, it gives you competitor edge. It brings so many different diverse minds around a table, which will create greater innovation. There's just no downside to it at all. I think the impact is huge. And then on the other side, the impact is also huge for the organizations that aren't, because they will be the ones that are actually missing out on that incredible talent.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just going to add to that. I think even if you were to think of it from a, you know, like you're saying, like from a bottom line, you know, there's the right thing to do and there's being a good human. A lot of this is just about being a good person and doing the right thing. But also there are billions of pounds being lost currently by the number of people that are out of work that could be in work. And so like you're really missing a trick if you're not investing in different types of people.
We've just had a question that I think is, and Nicole, I'm very aware that I interrupted you because I did ask you to talk about specific neurodivergent, and I'd like to come back to that, please. I've written myself a note so that we don't butterfly off in another direction. But we've had a question that I think is very relevant to now, and we will answer all questions, but I'd like to read it out. So neurodivergence is very varied and it's not possible to generalise. However, should neurotypical people adjust their own behaviour to act and communicate in a way which is supportive of neurodivergent people and acknowledges specific needs? I think that's relevant to what we're talking about now.
Yes, would be
And be curious as well. It would be my contribution to that, is just ask questions, be curious, and educate yourselves. The amount of education I've had to do for myself since this journey began with Amber is huge, absolutely huge. But I actually also bring that to work with me every single day and have helped other people within the workplace because of the education that I've given myself on what makes Amber who she is and how to understand her better. Because that's, if you strip it back, that's all you're really doing is how do you understand somebody better, whether they're autistic or neurotypical. Like, people like to work in particular ways. That's literally all you're doing, if you strip it back, is understanding that individual better.
Yeah. And actually I think it was the original poster, or it's somebody else jumping in on the question, but they've actually just written how should rather than should. So their question was, how should neurotypical people support neurodiverse people?
Yeah, so I think that training, which we can provide, of course, at Ambitious About Autism, just a little plug there. Training is really important. It's really important. Like, the pathway goes, if I'm going to remember all the points, it goes to awareness, understanding, acceptance, commitment. Awareness, we're kind of there. We've all heard of autism, right? We know what a lot of these conditions are called. Understanding is the next big one. We can't understand things we don't know what they are. We're often fearful as a society of things that we don't understand. And so it's really important that, exactly what Amy was saying, you educate yourself, and you do that by yourself, by reading, watching, documentaries. It's all out there, but also by, particularly for companies, getting in trainers who can give you that knowledge for your entire team. And then when you start to have that understanding, you can get to the place of acceptance, and then you can commit to to that acceptance moving forward. I think that what you will find is that any kind of adaptations that you might make for a neurodiverse individual is going to be a benefit to everyone in your workforce. Nothing that I have ever seen put in place for an autistic person has been detrimental to anyone else. So, for example, if you offer your staff like flexible approaches to their working hours, then how much more beneficial would that be for someone who, say, has like a chronic illness, or who has children, or who, I don't know, just is a night owl and doesn't want to have to get up at the crack of dawn to commute into work. What it does is start to make your workplace generally more inclusive and more flexible. There's a reason, I think, the employment statistic actually jumped up nearly 8% across the pandemic. What changed in the pandemic, specifically in the workplace, that might have improved it for an autistic person? I think we all know that the answer is that it looks like I'm in a lovely office, but you can see by the shape around my hands is that I'm in my home. That was a massive change. We immediately got more flexible approaches to working, and immediately everyone thought productivity is going to drop. No one's going to be able to do it. And we're still here. So what we proved is that was not the case. So that was, I went off on a little bit of a tangent there, but that is
very valid tangent though. Yeah. So somebody's just asked a question. I will come back to the others, but I'm just trying to do it in order. Amy mentioned the NHS waiting lists, which are long for children and very, very long for adults. We work directly with the NHS to reduce wait times and improve outcomes, but it's a big job and constantly governed by budget restrictions. Do you see, and I think this is a really good question, do you see the responsibility to improve access and get more neurodivergent people into and retained in work coming from the employer as a benefit, or potentially from I'm not sure what it means by that, from insurers in the future? So I guess that question really, and we talked about this, is how much should employers sort of encourage individuals to understand their own minds better, and how much should come from an employer rather than being reliant on the NHS waiting lists? It's a big old question.
It is, isn't it? I mean, I think it would be incredible if that accountability lied within the organisation, and that was something that an organisation could support with. If somebody are we talking sort of if someone was wanting a diagnosis, but waiting time was really long, and to help them,
I think so. And actually, it's happening, isn't it? If you look at fertility as an example, there are now all sorts of businesses that offer fertility benefits where you bypass the NHS and you go and you deal with the clinic directly, or they give you the support that you would otherwise seek through a GP. I guess, I don't even know if that sort of support exists for employers to be able to access.
So
I haven't come across it, but I think that it should. I think that would be
so
incredible.
I guess to weigh in. So first of all, the Equality Act does not require you to have a diagnosis. The Equality Act considers a disability based on your needs, not whether you have a piece of paper that defines a diagnosis. Employers need to provide support to their staff regardless of whether that person has a diagnosis or not. If they need support and they need adjustments, they have a legal requirement to provide that for their staff. There is, particularly if that person is coming to them and saying, look, I haven't got a diagnosis yet, but I'm autistic or I have ADHD. We know what the waiting lists are like. So just go move forward with that. If that's what they need, then do that. And certainly for large employers that have access to health insurance, absolutely, they should be offering support for diagnostics through that. I know that there are companies that we've worked with who have built that into their insurance packages, and also not just offering it for the individual employees, but offering it for family diagnosis also. So I do think that there is a level of responsibility there, but the diagnosis should not be seen as the be all and end all. If people want to get a diagnosis, they should be allowed and enabled to pursue that. And if they don't have to, and you should be supporting them anyway.
Either way,
no, absolutely. Somebody's actually just asked why I don't want one, and I'm happy to talk about that. But on the note that we were just talking about, I think we should go back a step and talk about the type of culture that an organisation needs to have in order for people to even be brave enough to say, I would like to explore a diagnosis, or I would like different measures in place to support how I need to work. So Amy, you might want to, this is obviously you do this day in, day out. So can we talk about how managers can support this process and removing stigmas?
Yeah, sure. And you kind of hit the nail on the head, really. It's about building a culture that's inclusive, where there is that level of psychological safety, because if you have psychological safety, people will be able to bring their authentic self out of choice. It's not, it can always be a choice to not share that as well. And a lot of people do that. But if they feel that they need to, they have that space that they can do that and bring their authentic self to work. And that's when you see employees thrive. And I think it comes back to something we've been working on recently within the brand area, is that, if you look at the broader DE&I, so diversity, equity and inclusion, which neurodivergency forms a part of, it belongs to everybody. And that's, you think about an individual and all the layers of intersectionality and what that looks like, and that can mean so many different things to so many different people. But if you have this culture where somebody feels that they belong, no matter what their layers of intersectionality are, that's when you're winning, and that's when you get the best out of your people, and you have an environment where everyone can thrive. And I think with managers specifically, you can look at things what we've talked about, which is about educating themselves and being curious and asking questions. And then there's the practical areas, which are, I think Nicole's also touched on, which is around agile working, policies that support flexible working and things like that. So I think it's a mixture, but everything comes back to that same point. If you have that inclusive culture where somebody feels that they belong, then that's the best way for it to be.
And we've actually had a question, you've just mentioned policy, we've had a question, do you believe a neurodiversity policy should be separate to a mental health policy or an ED&I policy? They're currently looking at their mental health policy and would like to know where neurodiversity should be.
Nicole, I don't know what your thoughts are on this. I would see it as more as part of the D&I strategy and an umbrella, and mental health would be separate. I don't know what your thoughts are, Nicole, if you would agree.
So usually when we review policies, we're not looking to create specifically a neurodiversity policy. I think that if you want to and you have one, then go for it. But I would also expect to see them for pretty much everything else also, which would become quite vast quite quickly. what we would look for, which a lot of companies don't necessarily have, is a reasonable adjustments policy. So a workplace adjustments policy. I don't love the word reasonable, to be honest. And that would be really putting something pen to paper and saying that what are people entitled to when they come and work for your company. So whether they have, been neurodivergent or they have any other kind of disability or additional support need, what can they access and what are your rules around that? Because that's the thing that's really going to make a difference. And like Amy said, it will be really what is your focus? Is it around recruitment? In which case, yes, it might form kind of ED&I about getting more diverse people into your company. When it comes to your existing employees, absolutely adjustments policies, and also staff networks are incredibly important when it comes to those. So I think it's looking at what is your intention, what are you aiming to achieve from the work that you're doing. I don't think anyone has, a lot of policies just sit there. So you want to be creating something that's going to be utilised, and not just something that people get on their first day, have to read and then never look at again.
Never revisit. Can we answer? We've got a question I think Amy should answer, and then I'd like to move to Nicole to talk about those kind of quick wins. So, what can we do to instantly make the workplace more accessible, and from a recruitment perspective? I'm just very aware of the time and not going over. So, the question to Amy: what advice do you have for employers to enable them to support parents and carers going through that process?
So without coming back to the whole coaching thing, but if I had been, it could be a lifeline. So offering somebody coaching to help them with boundaries, balancing, juggling, all those sorts of things, I think would be absolutely incredible. I also think that type of benefit enables you to build a support network within the organisation, which I have where I am now, and without it, I don't know where I would be. So I think that forming those sorts of groups, which I think Nicole touched on as well, would be hugely beneficial. And it's the understanding that they may not always be their best self all the time, because you don't know what battles they've had to deal with before they even turn their laptop on, and just being okay with that and having a space that it's okay to be that as well. I had to have that psychological safety. For me was it was a lifesaver. So to build that for your employees, I think is really important. To be able to say, today I'm not okay, or I need to move my 9 a.m. meeting because I'm still battling trying to get my daughter through the school door. And just having that level of understanding.
Yeah, and a safe place to be able to have those conversations.
Yeah.
So Nicole, no pressure, but can we have a quick fire? How can we change the world?
Start at the beginning. A lot of the time, people that are coming into your company are the first time they're going to see you is through a job description. You need to make your job descriptions clear, to the point, not including loads of acronyms and ambiguous language. A job description should give the candidate a good understanding of what the job will require them to do and what the actual skills are that they need to have to complete the role. It doesn't need to have a lot of other stuff. I think that one of the examples one of my lovely colleagues used was, it should not say beverage dissemination officer if your role is bar staff, for example. But you'd be surprised how much that kind of language gets used and littered throughout job descriptions all the time. You need to sense check your job descriptions and stop rambling on about stuff that ultimately people aren't that interested in, and it isn't telling them anything about the role or your company. And it becomes, if anything, entertaining. And share interview questions with your candidates in advance. This is particularly for autistic or otherwise neurodivergent candidates. But if you share your interview questions in advance with all of your candidates that are interviewing for you, I 100% guarantee you will have a more positive recruitment experience. When people are prepared and know what they are due to be talking about, They speak much more coherently and confidently. It doesn't mean they lack knowledge or experience. It just means they're able to talk about it in a better way. No one's best case scenario in life is being in a job interview. It's never going to be where someone is going to be performing at their best. So don't try and trip people up, prepare them to succeed. And then finally, again, exactly what we've all been saying is challenge your work culture to be more transparent and inclusive. Ask yourself the questions, are there neurodivergent staff networks within your company? Do you know how many of your current employees are neurodivergent or autistic? Are there specific groups for lived experience for those with neurodivergent conditions? And are there processes, policies, and supports in place already for autistic staff? Which I think also brings us quite nicely to the poll, which I believe those questions have been posed.
Yeah, thank you so much. We've got more questions as well, but I'm not sure we're going to have time to get to them. So I wonder if anybody who's asked a question that we haven't been able to answer, if you want to message me on LinkedIn, I'm Madeline Grace Cole on LinkedIn, and then I will connect you with the best person to be able to answer it. That's probably the best thing to do. Sorry, Jenna, I was worried we've run on.
Don't worry, that's fine. So I do have the answers to the first original poll.
Been a question about any free training available. Nicole, I think that would probably come from you guys. So to our recruitment, induction and area managers to help better identify and aid employees, is there any way you can signpost people to?
So on our on the Ambitious About Autism website, if you go onto employers, we have a toolkit available there for employers. We don't offer free training because we're a charity, but we can provide training as part of a support package. If you're looking to hire more autistic staff, we can support you to create a role and a work opportunity for an autistic young person, and support you to adapt your processes to get them in and support them in the workplace. And training comes as part of that package. We also have a very excellent training and consultancy team who are predominantly made up of people who have lived experience of autism, who do brilliant training offers.
Thank you very much. That's fab. Jenna, shall I do another question, or are you ready?
I'll quickly just talk through it, if that's okay.
Yeah, fab.
So out of everybody who's attended today's session, 83 have actually participated in this poll, which is really, really encouraging. For the first initial question, the estimate of percentage of people in the workforce that are neurodivergent. So of 1 to 5, we've got 36 people within their workplace who think that is the case, and then it rolls on, but a staggering amount, 33% of that total don't actually know, they're not aware. But interestingly, I want to jump to the final question because I think that adds a lot of substance. Of all of the individuals who answered and engaged, we've got 10 responses with the answer to the question of what reasonable adjustments have been made to most successfully in the workplace to support staff who are neurodivergent. We've got 10 really fantastic answers, and a lot which Nicole was talking about earlier on, about things like adjusting work patterns, increased working from home options, separate offices perhaps, noise cancelling headphones. So there's lots of encouraging things that people are doing to support the workforce. Would you like me to jump to the second poll that's now running, which is
yeah, please do.
So 100% of these have been answered. So out of everybody who's been polled, so the first question is, do you feel you understand the needs of neurodivergent people has improved as a result of attending this webinar? 100 people and 100%, sorry, have said yes.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
And 54% have actually engaged with the final question. So what changes do you think you'll engage with the organisation to make it a more inclusive and neurodivergent people? Apologies. I'm going to end that poll now just so we can reveal the actual comments, if that's okay. There we are. So if I share these results, let's have a look. Review policies to make sure that people are getting the support they need. Think about what additional support neurodivergent people actually need during our recruitment process. Provisions and information to let staff know that we support them and what we can offer, and allow people to be themselves, and then training managers to improve their understanding of this, and obviously have a bigger and engaged workforce, obviously in terms of shared knowledge, the impact that this can have. So we've had some really encouraging feedback, and I think the questions have been fantastic. So yeah, everybody seems to be very thoroughly engaged with this topic, which is fantastic to see. So thank you all very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us all, and for giving us a platform to share so much information. And that's incredible that 100% of people feel they've learned something and can benefit from it. So of all the questions that we've not got to, please do get in touch with me on LinkedIn, any of the others on LinkedIn. I'm Madeline Grace Cole if you want to look me up, and I can always field questions through to the right person. And I'm sorry that we didn't get through them all. We had a flurry of questions at the end, which is brilliant. But thank you so much to our panelists for giving up their time. And thank you so much to Jenna and Sante Group for giving us a platform to be able to talk about this.
You're very welcome. Just a final note from us to say that the recording will be shared post-record of today. So if anyone does want to share it amongst their workforce, it'd be fantastic for them to do so. But thank you all again. And I'm going to end the live recording now. So hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Lovely. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.